This is the School Leadership Show, the only podcast dedicated to helping practicing and aspiring school leaders improve their craft. The School Leadership Show brings together thought leaders from inside and outside of education to deliver you the insights and tools you need to succeed in school leadership. And by the way, we're looking for sponsors for the show. If you or someone you know might be interested in reaching over 50,000 listeners, email me at mike@schoolleadershipshow.com. In this episode, Jenn David Lang, the author of The Main Idea, and I talk about another one of her book summaries. This one, The Mindful School Leader, Practices to Transform Your Leadership and School by Valerie Brown and Kirsten Olson. So in this conversation, we both, Jenn and I, make a case for the need for school administrators to develop their own mindfulness practices, science, stories, and strategies. This interview has it all. And if you think you don't have time for mindfulness practices, then you need them more than anybody. You can reach Jenn at her website for The Main Idea, themainidea.net. And I'm a happy subscriber of The Main Idea and a big fan of Jenn's work. She's offered to send listeners of this episode a free summary of The Mindful School Leader if you send her an email at j.david-lang@themainidea.net. It's definitely worth the time. Enjoy this interview with Jenn David Lang. So I'm here again with Jenn David Lang. Hi, Jenn.
Hi, how are you doing, Mike?
I am spectacular. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. So we're here today to talk about a book that you summarized recently called The Mindful School Leader, Practices to Transform Your Leadership and School. So by Valerie Brown and Kirsten Olson, it looks like. So why did you pick this book?
Well, I think anyone who's listening who's a school leader knows it's one of the most difficult jobs there is. And somehow right now seems to be a very difficult time to be a school leader because there's so much pressure to close the achievement gap, meet accountability goals, update our schools so we're all functioning in the 21st century. There seems to be an unprecedented amount of demands on school leaders right now. And I thought it was a useful tool and also something I have always been interested in myself and done a fairly poor job of conducting any kind of regular mindfulness practice. So I thought it was a good combination of the personal and and career-wise for other people. So I thought I would dive into that book.
So I'm sure we're going to have to sell some people on this because people hear mindfulness and they think woo-woo, yoga, which I'm only half mocking because my wife is like the highest level of Baptiste yoga instructor. So I might get hurt. But there will be people out there who are like, yeah, whatever, mindfulness, come on. But there is, and you talk about it, you write about it in the summary, there's some science behind this, right?
Yes, there's science, and let me say that I completely understand people's skepticism about it. I remember early on in my education career, I took a yoga mindfulness class at about 8 p.m., and it made me so relaxed that I couldn't do any work afterwards, and I thought, this is terrible, I don't want to do this. So I understand the skepticism, I understand the misconceptions. Mostly for me, I was concerned that it was something selfish. It was a practice that was going to take me time, and it was going to take time out of my day being productive in supporting other people. And what science has shown is that there are actually a lot of benefits to mindfulness meditation. There are the health benefits from helping you deal with stress so the hormones don't attack your body and wear you down. And what that helps with is your longevity as a school leader. Certainly one of the worst things for a school is when a principal or other school leader has to leave before her or his time. Nobody wants high turnover in a school. So if you can take care of yourself, it's the whole riding in the airplane and put the oxygen mask on yourself first before your child. I always used to think I would never do that. I'd put it on my child first. But now I understand the importance of us taking care of ourselves. In a recent study, it said that 84% of school leaders were not taking care of themselves. I'm not sure exactly how or what that means, but I think most of us who've been school leaders often don't put ourselves first.
Oh, I think absolutely. I see that all the time.
Yeah, I mean, what grade would you give yourself, Mikey? You're a district leader. How well do you take care of yourself?
Out of 10, I give myself a 7, maybe. I have work to do, but I think I take time for myself. And, sometimes I self-medicate in inappropriate ways. But other than that, I probably shouldn't be disclosing too much here. But, but it's, I would say pretty decent. And a lot of that has come, honestly, from my wife and her work with the yoga teaching that she's kind of pulled me along, almost begrudgingly, but it makes a difference.
Yeah, no, you're a good example of someone who has made this a priority. You talk about it in a lot of your podcasts. And so that's the first benefit, is certainly your health, not just for yourself, but in terms of your family and your organization. The other thing is that research has shown that a practice of mindfulness helps you in the moment make better decisions instead of just the knee-jerk reaction, but taking the time and being able to focus. Your memory is better. Research supports the fact that this helps your memory. This helps you problem solve. This helps with all those skills that you need as a school leader. So you actually do better at your job because you end up responding intentionally rather than reactively.
I think that's a huge deal, because that is a mistake that I often see, particularly new leaders or new school administrators make, is that automatic reaction to something versus slowing down and taking time to make decisions and not letting the events control you.
Exactly.
So how is...
There's a couple more benefits, though. Hold on.
Keep going.
All right. We got the health. We've got the decision-making in the moment. Then there's the... It enhances your communication, the way that you interact with the people around you. There are parts in this book, and we'll get into it, about mindful listening and mindful communicating. But think about the difference between a school leader who constantly conveys, I'm in a rush, I'm crazed, I'm not really listening, on the phone, texting, chatting, versus a school leader who can really be present in their interactions with people. That changes the ball game in terms of communicating with families, with teachers, with administrators, and with students. It's a very different kind of way to go about your day and communicate. So we definitely have to talk about that in this podcast, is how it affects your communication skills.
I thought that piece was fascinating. And you put that in your professional development section too, which I thought was a great idea. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, we'll get to that. So the benefits, so health, decision-making, communication, and then ironically, it can really help you with improving the instruction of your teachers, because imagine if you're communicating better, then you're able to be more responsive to what your teachers need. And if you're really able to put things aside when you go into a classroom and observe, you can take in a lot more, and you'll be able to give better feedback. And the feedback will be better received because the relationship is better. So it doesn't seem like there's a one-to-one connection between mindfulness and improved instruction at your school, but there really are a lot of connections between those two. Kim Marshall talks about how principals get into this, what does he call it, the hyperactive superficial principal syndrome, where you're always, running around and getting things done. And it's a very different approach to go very purposefully into a class with the intention of helping the teacher and helping to improve teaching and learning. So those are 4 pretty big benefits.
Well, and I think there's this... it's kind of a misnomer out there, or maybe it's urban legend or suburban legend. I don't know, but this idea that in order to appear to be working hard and getting a lot done, you as a school leader have to have this frenetic pace that you always look like you're super busy. But I kind of feel like, as I watch people go through their careers, it seems like that is, in a lot of ways, I think, almost like an excuse, or not an excuse, but just that they're not focused on the right stuff, or maybe they're not as efficient as they could be. And like you said, they're not in the moment. They're always thinking about something else, buried in their phone or their laptop, and that it does a lot to hurt culture in a building, I find,
Yes.
if the leader's not present.
Yes, it affects culture. Well, certainly, Daniel Goleman in Primal Leadership, he talks about the leader's approach is contagious. The leader's mood, the leader's energy, it's contagious. So if you're running around in a frantic way, how do you think your staff is going to respond?
Yep.
They're not going to calmly go about their day and deal with real people, real problems, real challenges in a calm and measured way.
And it's interesting because I have that conversation with district office administrators all the time, because if they head over to a building that's in crisis, we talk about, what is your demeanor when you come in? If you come in hot with you're all crazy and sort of appearing out of control, that does nothing to help calm everybody else. In fact, it just whips everybody else up into a lather. So that idea of coming in and modeling the control and the restraint and that decision-making ability that you want to see in the folks that you work with, it matters. It's a big deal.
It's a very big deal. I like that you work with the district staff on that. I think that has a big impact. And I don't think that people are intentionally doing this. I think, and they highlight this in the book, they do little snapshots of school leaders. And, one school leader said, I thought I needed this anxiety to be productive. And
right.
I just assumed this is what professional life was. So you feel like, running around and being frenetic, that's how you get more done. And so people are feeling like this is helping me to be productive. They don't understand that it's actually counterproductive.
I agree with you. And I think, like I said, I think a lot of times that frenzied behavior is an excuse to not do the stuff that you should be doing.
Yeah, or you don't know any other way. It's
right.
What was modeled to you when you worked with other leaders, and then as you become a leader, it's sort of the only way you know how to go through the day.
I had a colleague early in my administrative career who told me that you should always carry a clipboard and walk fast. That way people won't stop you in the hallway and take up your time.
Yeah, yes. And one of the leaders she highlights, and I'm sure many of your listeners can relate to this, he was considered a fast leader. Everything about him was fast. He walked fast, he talked fast, he ran meetings quickly. And I think that he assumed that way he could get everything done more quickly. And he didn't realize the toll this was taking on his health and on the relationships within the school building.
So you mentioned the snapshots. You want to talk a little bit about how this book is organized? Because I thought that was kind of interesting, and I could pick up most of it from the summary. But how did the authors approach this?
Well, I think that they wanted to make sure that people knew this is a book for the mindful school leader. This is not just a generic mindfulness book. So they use some very real examples of principles that they've worked with. They've worked with, hundreds of principles, and gave real examples that many of us could relate to. They talked about the scattered principle, this one principal who, wakes up every day at 3 a.m., starts to plow through some emails to get a jump start on the day, and then realizes he hasn't gotten a gift for his sister. So he starts poking around online to get a gift for his sister, but then a pop-up ad comes up for Costa Rica, and he's never been to Costa Rica. And then by the time he's leaving for school at 5:30, he hasn't really accomplished anything, and in fact forgot the gift for his sister. And I think we read these snapshots and all of us can relate in some way to the fast leader, the scattered leader, all these different stories.
And then they use those snapshots then to kind of anchor into the mindfulness practices that would help a person like that, right?
Yes. They show how from their work and from them adopting these different practices, and they give a few examples in each chapter of an actual mindfulness practice that you can use. And it's really tailored to the school leader. They have a very basic sort of 101. It's called STOP, which is a 3-minute practice. And they say if you don't have time for that, there's a 1-minute practice. And if you don't want to do that type of formal mindfulness practice, you can also do something more informal, which is practicing mindfulness while you're walking through the halls of your building, or while you're walking your dog in the morning, or in talking with a person. So they introduce both formal and informal practices. And I thought that was very helpful, especially for people who, like you're saying, are worried that this is going to take their time, or they're cynical about the benefits of
Well,
it.
I think it's important that we say it, that, if you feel like, if you're a school leader, if you're any person, and you feel like you don't have 3 minutes to pay attention to your own mindfulness and health, then you need it more than anybody.
That is true. That is true. Yeah.
So do you want to talk about some of the specific strategies? Do you think that would be helpful?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll talk about this one example, this principle, and the basic 101. So it's two authors, talk about STOP, S-T-O-P. It's an acronym, always my favorite. The S stands for stop. So you should stop whatever you're doing, and you can set an alarm to do this a couple times a day. It's only 3 minutes. The T is take a breath. The O is observe, acknowledge, allow what's happening. And the P is then proceed and be present. And they suggest doing this twice a day. It could be the first thing when you wake up in the morning. It could be 2 breaks during the day. And I think what's helpful about developing this practice is that you're doing it not in the middle of a crisis, but you're developing the practice along the way, so that if every day as school leaders deal with crises, they've built up a different way to respond to a crisis rather than a knee-jerk reaction. So I used to think, okay, I can just start breathing when I'm stressing out. And that's not really how it works. You sort of have to build up the practice, but it doesn't take that much time to build it up. They say you can start it, and within weeks you feel the difference.
But isn't it interesting though that we have to be taught that? Like I wouldn't expect, having not run in 6 months, to get off the couch and run a marathon. Yet I would expect that in a crisis, I could just automatically turn on my calmness.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we assume that we're powerful enough that we can do that. But, another part of research that has contributed to this field has to do with understanding neuroplasticity, and the idea that we used to believe that the brain stopped changing and evolving around adolescence or early 20s. And now we understand that the brain changes throughout life. And it changes as a result of our experiences, and it changes as a result of the way we think. And so you are literally training your brain to react in a different way. So if normally when something happens and I get stressed and I lash out at people, or I find someone to blame, or I take it personally and I feel it inside my body and I stop breathing, then I can actually train myself so that when these crises appear in the future, instead of immediately going to blaming myself or others, I can go through this stop process where I can take a moment.
And I think for a lot of successful leaders, I'm guessing that they and I put myself in the category too, that over time you stumble into some of these practices, maybe not in a mindful way. But I was having this conversation with a colleague yesterday, as a matter of fact. We had a real busy day. If we kind of point out where we are in time right now, it was the day before the winter break. So the Friday before, we're going to have a week off. And I mean, there were places that were in open rebellion. It was mayhem in some of the places. And we were having this conversation that it went something like, do you remember when you used to have difficult conversations and your heart would race and you'd start to sweat and you'd get all flushed? And we were kind of laughing about that. And now it's like, okay, yeah, whatever. Now we don't even react. So I think there's part of that's learned, but I think you can get there quicker and in a more productive way by actively trying some of these strategies.
Well, also, and you're someone, and this colleague you were speaking to, you've survived, right? So I don't know where this person was in his or her career, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So obviously, this person has found a way not to be so stressed out by the daily life of being a school leader. But for some people, this is preventing them from burning out and leaving the job or even the profession before that happens. Because for some people, they react the same way to stress over and over, year after year. And they need to teach themselves. You're actually building different neural pathways in your brain that show the body a different way to respond to stress.
And that's a big deal. And I don't want to gloss over the fact that we don't want people, can't afford to have people burn out, because not only are we experiencing a critical shortage of teachers, but that is quickly translating into a shortage of good and qualified school leaders. I mean, trying to find a high school principal these days in upstate New York is a challenge.
Yeah. So it is about keeping people in the profession and helping them develop that sense of balance before they leave.
So I think I stopped you halfway through stop.
Oh,
did we?
No, so stop halfway through. Yeah, so I mean, I'll read through, sort of the steps, and people can certainly try it on their own. But the idea is to sit quietly in a place with your spine comfortably straight and your eyes open or closed. And you should notice how you're sitting without any judgment, and feel the different parts of your body, your legs, your torso, your arms, your face. And then it helps to locate where in the body you feel your breath. Principals often start to forget they have a body. So where do you feel your breath in your body? And really bringing attention to your breath is very important in this process. Often how you're breathing is a reflection of how you're doing. And your mind will wander, but the idea is to bring it back to the breath and to the body and just focus on being okay and accepting yourself as you are. And after 3 minutes, you stretch, open your eyes, and try to do this in a daily way. And it can take 3 minutes. It can take less than 3 minutes. The school leader that she featured in this particular chapter, she talked about him developing a new morning routine. So he used to wake up at 5 a.m. and rush to his emails. And instead, now he appreciates this quiet time before his wife and 3 children have woken up. And he takes a moment to be thankful for this peace and the people around him. He appreciates the sun coming in through the windows. And he's learned to focus on his breath. Just take 3 deep breaths to help him relax and focus on the present. It doesn't mean he doesn't have concerns. He's still concerned about the upcoming board meeting and his youngest daughter's troubles in middle school. But rather than fighting these difficult feelings, he accepts them. And he has a little mantra where he says to himself, I'm capable, I will be all right. And that whole routine takes 3 minutes. So instead of starting his day at 5 with the emails, now it's 5:03. So it's really not that much time. And I've found myself, because I've had a lot of trouble developing a routine, I've decided to anchor it with something that I do every day, which is make my bed. And I don't always make my bed at exactly the same time, and it's different on the weekends, but I do at some point get to making my bed. And then with a nice, neat bed and the shades pulled up, I just try to sit on the end and take just a few minutes. And it's nothing I've mastered. I'm still working on it, but as I read somewhere, or someone once said to me, that's why we call it a mindfulness practice, because you are practicing. You haven't mastered it.
Well, and I think that's the bigger message here, is that it has to work for you. I can't necessarily do exactly what Jen does, because it might not work for me. And
yes.
And I like that idea of thinking of it in terms of a practice and something that does work for you in your life, and that where you see a difference in how you feel and how you approach things.
Yeah, and it's perfect for school leaders, because we run these learning organizations. And what is learning about? Learning is about stopping and reflecting and trying to improve and move forward. And so it fits well with a mindfulness practice, where it forces you to take a moment out and reflect, and not just to run through the day.
Good. So, all right. So we talked about the stop. Okay. Now, where do you want to head next with strategies?
The part that was very meaningful for me was about the communication and speaking and listening mindfully, and also mindful walking. So maybe since we just did the stop, a more informal practice that they talk about is mindful walking. So I don't think there's any school leader who doesn't walk through his or her building, right? All of us, walk through our buildings, whether it's on the way to an observation or simply you're walking through your halls. And she talks about you can just use that time to take 2 or 3 minutes to be aware of your breath, your environment, your body. You can feel all the parts of your feet on the ground, your heels, the balls of your feet, your toes. And you just bring your focus to your body. And let's say you're finished walking, you're about to go into a classroom for an observation. Instead of just rushing in, just take a moment to stand still and notice how you feel. And I like that idea because it's really incorporated into something that every school leader does every day. And you walk into the classroom with a clear mind and a relaxed body. So that was a practice I really liked.
I love that one. And that's tough to do if you're walking down the hall with your head buried in your cell phone.
Yes.
And,
yes, that is very hard.
And I think if I would tell administrators, and I'm guilty of it occasionally too, but I leave your cell phone in your office. I mean, if they want to find you in your building, you're either carrying a walkie-talkie or they can find you. You're not going to hide. So I would just say leave it in your office, and that would be one very concrete way to help yourself be a little bit more mindful in those moments.
Absolutely. And that connects to mindful communication, that it's very hard to forge a connection with a teacher or staff member you're speaking with if you have your phone out, if you have everything buzzing every few seconds. And if you can improve one thing in the new year, if you can improve your speaking and listening skills so that you are more mindful, your staff will notice.
And what did they? So let's talk about the communication piece. So, what did the authors offer specifically in terms of how to make your communication more mindful?
Well, this, first of all, just to frame it, this is very connected to a leader's emotional intelligence, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, and that has a lot to do with being aware of your own feelings, the feelings of others, and then being able to manage those feelings and develop that self-awareness. So, they talk, I particularly like the mindful listening. That's a challenging one for me, where often when we're having a conversation with someone, we're not really listening to hear them out. We're listening so that we can comment, so that we can say something next. And so can you as a leader listen without, and curb that impulse to correct, to fix, to counsel? Can we just listen to really hear what the person is saying? Can we listen to hear for what the person is not saying, which is also a part of the conversation? And I thought that was really brilliant. There was a quotation from somewhere, I don't remember where, which says, your listening is the relationship.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. That's a criticism you often hear of folks who end up not being successful in leadership positions was, he or she, they just didn't listen to me, or they didn't care. And oftentimes they don't care is a synonym for they're not listening.
Yeah. And, and I think when people feel listened to, they feel cared for. And in fact, and they can do better things. People who feel listened to move on and make new insights and new connections. And I think they're more likely to want to improve in their work. They feel a sense of belonging. So the listening piece is really key. And in another book that I summarized recently, The Art of Coaching Teams by Elena Aguilar, she has this great whole list of, it's like a checklist that you can sort of think about what kind of listening you're doing when you listen to someone. And I'm going to just read some of these items off because unfortunately, we do a lot of these things while we're listening. Why do we listen? Do we listen to find connection? Your mind thinks, oh, I remember that happened to me. Do we listen to find a story of our own to share? Oh, I can tell her about the time I blah, blah, blah. Do we listen to ask a probing question, an open question that keeps the other person continuing to reflect and think? Do we listen, but we really want to jump in and finish the other speaker's sentence? Do we listen to ask a clarifying question because we want more information? Do we listen, but really feel impatient, wishing the person would just stop talking? Do we do fake listening in the state of fake news? There's fake listening where you're actually bored and sometimes nodding, but really spacing out and thinking about the things on your to-do list. So there are many reasons why we listen. And so in the Mindful School Leader, they suggest really trying to be present and try not to correct the person and think of the questions you're going to ask, except for a truly open-ended question for which you don't have the answer. So, how do you feel about that? What do you imagine the next step might be? So to try to challenge yourself and do some mindful listening in the new school year, where you approach a conversation with a real open heart and really with listening, not trying to control things. As one school leader said, she sees every conversation with a person as an opportunity for a mini mindfulness moment.
I think that that's a spectacular idea. And I think about one of my favorite questions when I'm really trying to listen is, or not really a question, but a prompt is to say more about that. Tell me more about that. And it's, then I don't know. I just feel like that's a way to just keep the other person talking. What I try to tell people is, and I try to practice too, is you should be listening 5 times as much as you're talking. And particularly in a group, because I think about if you are the leader, so if you're like the ranking person in the room, as soon as you talk, the other people, just by nature of positional authority, in a lot of cases are going to defer to you or are going to try to line up what they say to what you say. I play this little game in my own head. I try to be the last person to talk.
That's good.
Because I don't want to sway people one way or another, and I want to make sure that we're getting the best out of everybody, and they're not trying to agree with the person higher up on the food chain.
That's great. Yeah. My husband always says that you learn a lot more by listening than by speaking.
Absolutely. Well, and he's a counselor; he would know, right?
He would know. Yeah. And I think leaders often, they're not aware of it. They're not aware that they enter a meeting, speak for 10 or 15 minutes straight, and then say, does anyone want to add anything to the quote unquote discussion? So I think that's a real area for leaders to work on. And I like your approach to it and how you think about it. That's a great challenge to listen 5 times more than you speak. Not an easy thing to do.
And in particular too, when you're talking about, like, I think of team meetings, child study teams and, support team meetings, even CSE meetings, right? I always, and I had a principal that I worked with, he and his assistant principals worked this out. They were finding that they weren't getting a lot of conversation at these staffing meetings about students. It was a center-based special ed program. So what they started doing was the person sort of closest to the child talked first. So it might be if the child had a one-to-one aide, that person talked. Then the classroom teacher, then the speech pathologist, then the OT, then the PT, then it backed out, and then the administrator was the last person to talk. So that you got, and by that point, there really wasn't anything left to say. And then, I don't know, I feel like that is so much more powerful than the administrator giving his or her perceptions up front and then having everybody else's confirmation bias kick in and try to agree with what he or she said.
Well, it almost sounds like what you put into place was a protocol, right? That we start with the person who knows the child the best. And I think that especially if you're a leader who speaks too much, then you can put a protocol in place where perhaps at a small team meeting, a question is posed and it goes around the circle and everybody says one thing. That's one way to make sure there's equity in speaking and listening time.
What else did they offer up about communication?
It's funny, they mentioned speaking and listening, but they write a lot more about the listening piece. And one of the things I liked about the speaking part was that they said, imagine literally speaking from the heart, that you imagine the words coming from your mid-chest instead of your mouth, right? So instead of going into long-winded arguments about being right, that you just try to speak honestly and clearly and transparently. And a lot of the literature says how much that affects trust in a school as well. So all of the things that they mention are reflected in other literature as well in terms of being good for the school. So speaking mindfully, they say, like other things, is grounded in body awareness. Like I said, some principals speak for 10, 15 minutes, and they just literally do not know that they're speaking for that amount of time. They do not have an awareness of other people at the meeting who may be yawning or going on their phones or just simply not attending to the meeting. So if you have a practice of being more aware, then you become more aware of others as well. And so that affects the way that you speak.
So they kind of, there's a section on reflecting on leadership. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, they just give you a couple of questions and activities to step back and take time and think about your leadership. So they have one activity where they say, spend a few minutes jotting down some important milestones in your leadership journey. You know, when did you first notice yourself being a leader? It's not necessarily in a formal position. When did you feel your core leadership values shift, and what's been a challenging moment you experienced? So they'd suggest take 5 minutes just thinking about that. And then reflect for another 10 minutes. What did you notice about yourself from the milestones in your leadership career? What or who helped you grow as a leader? What have been obstacles to your growth? What does leadership require of you? What helps you show up as an authentic leader in challenging moments? So I think it's just the idea of stopping and taking time, but not the 3 minutes, taking a longer period of time. And they suggest even finding another partner, another leader, where you can explain some of your answers to these questions. And I think that's always a good practice as a leader to have a colleague, someone who can help you reflect, that you can actually reflect out loud. And, and I'll finish by saying that the book, there's a lot of great resources in the book. There are other books about mindfulness. There's lots of apps and websites that you can use because, like you said, Mike, you have to find something that works for you. So, if you need an app or a timer for 3 minutes, then, you can find that resource and use that. But there's a lot of great resources in the book. And further, if you want to introduce this to your teachers, it's also been shown that teachers who develop some type of mindfulness practice, they are better able to obviously react calmly in a classroom. When you are at a 1-to-30 ratio, that's very useful to be able to react calmly and peacefully and rationally in the moment. And also it just simply affects the teacher's relationship with their students when they have this practice and this ability.
Oh, that's amazing. So what did you change as a result of reading this book? How did your mindfulness practices change?
Well, I did a 4-week mindfulness challenge for any school leaders, and I did do 4 weeks. And I said to everyone, just choose 1 or 2 practices that you would do a day. And so my 2 practices was just the 3-minute breathing practice. And then to cultivate the positive, I was supposed to reflect for a moment with my husband at night on some moment of happiness or appreciation from the day. And I was a little more successful with the former practice than the latter, because the latter involved making sure my husband and I were in the same place and had time together, and that's hard with kids and work and everything. But for the 3-minute practice, I was more successful. It was more on my own, but I realized that I am not someone who has the same schedule every day. So the 3 minutes right away in the morning didn't always work for me. So that's where I came up more recently with this: make your bed, take 3 minutes. So that sort of evolved. And I definitely suggest going small, very small, if you want to try something for the new year. How about you, Mike? Do you have any practices that you're working on or you feel good about?
I have been working on the breathing, taking time. And it's funny, again, sort of stumbled into it. The Apple Watch has a thing where it kind of pings you to breathe every once in a while. And at first I just kept, dismissing it, whatever. And I thought, well, I'm going to try this for a few days. Absolutely made a difference. And I like that. And then the other one is journaling. So I try to write every day. I don't hit every day, but in a journal in the morning, 3 things that I'm going to grab it right here and look at it. So I write down, I can find my little Post-it here. One relationship that I'm thankful for, an opportunity today that's coming up, something great from yesterday, and then something simple near me. So it could be, the lamp, it could be, the chair here in the office. There's something that, I don't know. I forget where I even got these questions. It might have been from Tim Ferriss's podcast, but, just something, sort of routine, but, it kind of helps me focus because, when you think about journaling, people are, I don't know what to write about. So I start with those questions and then eventually, sometimes I'll just go off and write about other stuff, but that's been helpful for me.
I love the structure of that. That's a great idea to structure it that way. Very useful.
So if people want to learn more about this book, The Mindful School Leader, Practices to Transform Your Leadership and School by Valerie Brown and Kirsten Olson, what can they do?
They can certainly always order it online, but I'm happy to give your listeners a free copy of the book summary. If they send me an email and just mention the title of the book and this podcast, I will send that along.
And your email address is?
j.davidlang@gmail.com.
And if people want to learn more about The Main Idea?
Oh, The Main Idea. Yes, I summarize education books for school leaders, and they can learn more at themainidea.net.
Excellent. So, Jenn, as always, a spectacular conversation. I always learn stuff when I talk to you, and that is my measure of the people I want to hang around with.
Well, I learned some stuff too. I'm going to try to structure my journal tomorrow morning.
Spectacular. And I know we're going to anchor us a little bit in time, but enjoy time with family coming up on this holiday season, and we'll be back with another book to talk about here soon.
Okay, great. You too. Have a happy holiday. Take care.
This episode of the School Leadership Show has been brought to you by nobody. So if you know someone who would like to sponsor the show and reach over 50,000 school leaders, you need to email me at mike@schoolleadershipshow.com. In any case, thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, mike@schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.